You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I'm passionate about people, planet, and what makes our life better. But I strongly believe that the problem we're solving is solving what I call currency inequality. Africa, let's face it, is still highly consumer-based economy that depends on import into its economy. Being a diaspora, trying to do business on the continent comes with its own challenges. You come to regulatory challenges, policy challenges, and then you come to a harsh environment that is not that innovation friendly. Innovation is not just some random entrepreneurs trying to create a cool company. Innovation is an economic driver for the continent.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Michael Lawal, who is founder of Sendit.money, a platform that is providing an intuitive, secure, and inexpensive way to receive and send money. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about Michael Lawal.
Absolutely. I've listened to some of your series of the podcast, and I think there is a one that's been trending on LinkedIn. But just to kind of jump into it, my name is Michael Lawal. I'm the founder and CEO of Sendit.money. It's a really tough when people ask you to talk about yourself.
I know.
I wouldn't want to bore the listeners too much about who I am. But one thing summarized me, I'm passionate about people, planet, and what makes our life better. Whether in family, whether in team, whether in community, anything that makes people live, that brings people together and planets together. Those are things I care about. I'm a humanist. That's what summarizes me. I strongly believe human has to be at the core of everything we do. And that's been, in terms of entrepreneurship journey, I'm a third-time founder with one exit and also an angel investor when I have the opportunity to have the cash to support other entrepreneurs on their journey. Also, I'm a father. I'm a family man. Family keeps me sane from all the entrepreneurship madness.
Brilliant.
And yes, that's why I am in a nutshell. I'm passionate about people, planet, and everything that brings human closer together.
Brilliant. So you've given us a nice short overview of who you are in terms of your core values and passion of planet, people, and whatever makes life better, which is amazing. As I mentioned in the intro, you are the founder of Sendit.money. If we move away from talking about yourself, can you tell us a bit more about the company and the work that you're currently doing on the continent in Africa?
Absolutely. As you can appreciate, there is a huge, enormous problem across the world when it comes to currency aggregation. When I say there's a lot of founders building in the remittance space will probably not agree with me. But I strongly believe that the problem we're solving it's not remittance problem. The problem we're solving is solving what I call currency inequality.
Okay.
And I will explain further into that. You can imagine there is a continent called Africa, which I'm privileged to be from. And that continent has 54 countries and 54 different currencies from the 54 independent nations are classified by non-convertible currency. And to a layman, what that means is that currency cannot trade on a global forex exchange.
Yes.
That currency, every time someone is either sending or receiving money in Africa, the currency is pegged against US dollars. It has to go via US dollars. And that is what makes Africa the most expensive place in the world today to do any form of FX transaction. Whether you're doing remittance, whether you're paying for goods and services, whether SMEs buying goods in China, in the US or Europe, it still comes down that our livelihood and economy depends on it. Because Africa, let's face it, is still highly consumer-based economy that depends on import into its economy. And so the concept of having access to currency, to US dollars, to GBP, to euro, it's very important for economic growth on that continent. So for us, the problem we're solving is a remittance. The problem we're solving is currency inequality that makes life harder for immigrant families receiving money from their loved ones abroad, from international students receiving help from their family back home, from expats living on the continent, and from SMEs who are the backbone of the economy in Africa for the problem and the hardship they face when they're buying goods and import goods into the local economies in Africa.
Some very interesting points that you've raised there. So you don't believe there is a remittance issue. It's more of a currency insecurity, as the multiple 54 African currencies that we have are pegged against foreign currencies. And also in terms of African trade patterns or Africa's trade patterns, we are huge importers and not so much on the exporting side, which is something I'd like to get into during our conversation. One thing I was going to ask you is, the company services or what you do is focused on the African market. You're based in London, but you've managed to create a successful company that does operate within Africa. What have been some of the challenges as someone living in the diaspora trying to operate a business focused on the African market?
There's been quite a few challenges, but as most entrepreneurs, challenges is actually what makes entrepreneurs thrive, because the ability to turn those challenges into opportunities. I think being a diaspora, trying to do business on the continent comes with its own challenges. It comes to regulatory challenges, policy challenges, and then you come to harsh environments that are not that innovation friendly, right? Taking UK, for example, we're very grateful to UK government. We're recipient of Innovate UK Smart Grant.
Brilliant.
You have loads of opportunity to encourage local angel investors to invest in early stage company, because let's face it, early stage companies are very risky. And you have schemes like SEI, SEIS, which government kind of de-risk the business by enabling people to put money, and if it doesn't succeed, you get kind of tax incentive of 50 to 30% of your initial investment. So there are policies, the innovation environment is very friendly enough to encourage everyday people to support innovation, to support entrepreneurs. But back in Africa, it's tough. It's tough because policies, thanks to Nigerian startup bill, it's just been passed. That's a very good way to start. I hope many countries in Africa can follow suit, because innovation is not just some random entrepreneurs trying to create a cool company. It's gone beyond that.
Yes.
Innovation is an economic driver for the continent. And you've seen from the likes of every developed nation doesn't joke with innovation. When you take Germany, when you take United States, Canada, all these people are funding innovation. The government is de-risking innovation. There are policies every day that is making it easy for innovation to thrive, building ecosystem and collaboration with the private sector. Those are the challenges that are still there in Africa in terms of ecosystem. There is a lot of entrepreneurs doing their own thing. Not a lot of people have kind of come out of what I call cultural affinity, where you still have entrepreneurs doing their own thing in silos. They still believe they're competing against each other rather than thinking collaboration, rather than thinking how to leverage each other's resources. So on a very human level, on a governmental level, on a community level, there is still a lot of challenges and hurdles to cross. But having said that, we need to appreciate and celebrate the successes that the continent have achieved as well. Without any bias, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, these economies that are beginning to appreciate local entrepreneurs and diaspora entrepreneurs who are building something on that continent. And we've seen that in terms of capital inflow into these countries I've mentioned, in terms of innovation funding from predominantly US investors and then from investors from Europe as well. As this ecosystem begins to develop, there will be a lot of startups that will fail, but these founders will go on to start something else. The other day, I was seeing Inyolua, the co-founder for Flutterwave, saying on his LinkedIn, I know election is coming, and I'm more than happy in Nigeria, and I'm more than happy to have conversations with various presidential candidates on how to help them to put innovation and innovation policy as part of the agenda. So the ecosystem is progressing in the right direction. When we have entrepreneurs have succeeded and have exited, and they are now become fund managers, investing in other startup and entrepreneurs, but also having conversation and building bridges with policymakers and politicians, that is when we build a holistic ecosystem that enable innovation to thrive. Because it's more of a stakeholder management and looking at that stakeholder beyond entrepreneurs and its investor, but also looking at those political parties and looking at those politicians and looking at civil servants and looking at those local community market women. We can look at them holistically as part of that stakeholders that we need to manage and bring to table to have a very interesting conversation. Then that will get there. Another challenges that I've seen on the continent, and I've taken this conversation to a lot of places that I probably will not mention on this call, is beginning to re-educate in this part of the world, the older generations. They're mentoring, they're creating systems that bring younger people into government to enable young, fresh ideas. On the African continent, there is a clear distrust between the older generation and my generation, the younger generation, in terms of we don't trust these people. We don't think they like us. And that, you can see that in a lot of policies. And if you have anyone that works in international diplomacy, you can ask them this, because I had opportunity in my first company to work intersection of Fadama 2 project in Nigeria and some other African countries. And you see where the international donor agencies and the local government agencies, there's a massive disconnect between them and the people they're trying to help. The solution is not getting to them. So to me, is understanding that in Africa, we're used to creating pipelines rather than creating systems that create pipelines. And that it's a huge challenge when you have a policymaker that wake up tomorrow and make a policy that will kill an entire industry. Those challenges are still there, where we need to begin to understand how do we set frameworks and how does those frameworks bring stakeholders to the table, and those stakeholders can have a open, honest conversation in how to use innovation as a driver for economic growth. And what you'll have at the end are policies that are innovation friendly, that create a win-win for every ecosystem partners in the ecosystem, from the entrepreneurs to these investors, to local angel investors, to the citizens of the country, and also for the country as a whole.
Thank you for that, Michael. So you detailed, obviously, that the innovation environment in the UK is quite friendly. I guess the innovation environment in most Western countries, whether it's the UK, Germany, United States, is quite advanced and friendly. Also, something that's quite key is that innovation is an economic driver. And then I guess a segue to that is the positives of the Nigeria Startup Bill, which is something I'm keeping a close eye on to see how it develops. One thing we mentioned is that historically we've always heard cross-border payment or remittance is a challenge in Africa. So I just want to delve a bit deeper into what you do within the company in terms of what technology is used on the platform to drive the payments or drive the mechanisms that enable you to transact.
Absolutely. I think when we started sending the money, there are key questions I asked myself, and then we validated with larger audience, the real users of the platform. Is how do we create a new system? How do we leverage a new technology, an emerging technology that is not built today on existing legacy technology? Because if you Google remittance company right now as we speak, there's a huge loads of remittance company out there.
Yes.
Right? But then as someone with a payment background, then you ask yourself, is remittance actually a problem? To me, I strongly believe it's a no. Like I mentioned earlier, the problem is how do we make it easy for African currencies to trade directly with all the global currencies without the need for US dollars, without going too much into the nitty-gritty of blockchain and cryptocurrency. That's the reason you see the highest crypto traders are from the continent.
Yes.
Then you ask yourself, are these people using crypto just because they want to get rich quick syndrome? No. These are people which the only accessible means of trade today is using either Bitcoin or either USDT or USDC or Binance USD, those digital stable account USD. Because not mentioning the name of any particular bank, there's a lot of banks in Africa that say we're restricting your withdrawal today to $50 US. Just imagine an SME that has to make a payment for goods in China and he or she has to pay $10,000 US before the goods is shipped. And its local bank is telling that particular SME that you can only make a payment of $50 US in one single day, right? So that means that SME has to wait over and over, let's say up to a year, to be able to have the $10,000 US allocation. So people are now resorting into new means, accessible means of making payment happen. And that's what we're doing at Sendit.money. We're leveraging blockchain technology and bringing in USD peg stablecoin for transaction to happen. So someone in Nigeria today or someone in Ghana, peer-to-peer market, can buy stablecoin because they're accessible today. Those stablecoins can instantly be transferred or used to make payments anywhere in the world. We've destroyed barrier by creating access and pathway. That's what we do at Sendit.money. We enable transactions to happen hand to hand from Africa to the rest of the world and from Africa into the rest of the world, utilizing stablecoin, digital US dollars.
Awesome, awesome. So you mentioned that it's not built on legacy infrastructure and you're leveraging blockchain technology and also some of the challenges and barriers that you've removed to enable you to get to this point. So if we focus more on terms of the customer size, who are your target customers? Who are making these payments and how did you come to the conclusion that they required this service?
Our target audience, I don't like to use that word immigrant. If I can do it with it, I try to for political correctness.
Yes, understood.
These are individuals living in developed nation and supporting their family back home, right? These are international students. These are Africans living in diaspora. These are SMEs conducting trade within Africa and outside of Africa. And these are experts from developed nation living in Africa today. Those are key customer audience. As a third-time founder, I know what it means to build a product where no one is going to pay you a penny for. So for us, we spend almost 8 to 9 months in validation phase, actually testing that hypothesis with real users. Director of design, Bo and Andy, myself, were in Ghana throughout last year before we launched the product, where I spent about 2 months in Ghana, where he was there for about a week, where we actually conduct live real user testing in Ghana itself. So to us, I'm a firm believer in building what people want as a founder and not building what you think the market wants as a founder. So validation was very key for us into actually testing those hypotheses, actually understanding what users really want to see in the platform. And to us, it's not a hand-to-hand, it's a sprint. There will continue to be feedback and iteration in a journey as we progress as well as a company.
So you mentioned there a lot of your customers are African students, professionals, and SMEs, and also the validation process that you went through to understand the customer's needs. So typically when the money is sent and reaches back home, from your analysis, how is it usually spent?
In terms of the use of funds for the recipients of the funds back home, this will break your heart. People still use it for basic needs,
Yes.
like buying food and paying bills. And 80% of funds that we've seen in terms of use of funds are for basic things that people need in terms of shelter, in terms of welfare, in terms of food, in terms of healthcare as well. But there's an interesting development that's happened in terms of the data set that we monitor. 30% of diaspora inflow into Africa is now going towards diaspora buying properties in their home country.
Okay.
So that's a new trend that we started seeing in the last 1 year. And I see this trend will continue. Most banks in Africa probably still relying on government allocations as a means of making profit and consumer savings. But as the competition intensifies, I think banks are now being pushed to think outside the box. So in Nigeria, for example, the mortgage market is not as mature as this part of the world, but it's getting there. And as this mortgage market begins to mature and most build to sell products begins to mature as well, there'll be a lot of diasporas who have the economic power to buy most of this property. We started seeing that in Ghana. We started seeing that in Nigeria. We started seeing that in Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa. And we're going to start seeing a lot of diasporas because to most African diasporas, no matter how many years they've lived abroad, having a home back home, it's something very emotional and dear to their heart. So we're beginning to see that people are now actually not just receiving remittance, they're using those remittance for actual utility of day-to-day use cases. But beyond that, we've seen a lot of diaspora inflow going to actually owning property and investment back on the continent.
Most people who are in the African diaspora, such as yourself and myself, we do send money home for anything from family occasions, hospital appointments, emergencies, school fees, and just for day-to-day living or subsistence. And it's nice that you've kind of presented this information in terms of the new trends of people using remittance for investment in properties and businesses and in other areas. Do you have an idea of what's driving this new trend for people to be looking to use remittance more for, I guess, long-term purposes, for instance, for investment?
There's the massive shift across the world, right? Touching on Brexit, when Brexit happened, we saw a lot of Europeans living in the United Kingdom. They took it really personal. It feels to them like they're not welcome anymore in United Kingdom. And we've seen that from data shows us that. There's a lot of European experts living in the UK that moved back to other European countries like France and Germany and Luxembourg and Switzerland. And let's now fast track that to what happened. What we see when George Floyd incident happened in America, it became a huge wake-up call to a lot of African diasporas, whether they live in America, they live in Europe, wherever they live in. It was a huge wake-up call to them on a very human and personal level where they think, oh my God, so no matter how long, even I'm born here, it still looks like I'm not welcome. And what we saw, there's a trend that kicked off from that moment. We saw a lot of celebrities tracing their African roots and ancestry. A lot of them from Sierra Leone to Nigeria. With the Williams sister went to Lagos. There's a lot of celebrities that went to Sierra Leone. A lot of them went to Ghana. Ghana cashed in on that in terms of creating the year of return.
Yes, the year of return was huge.
Year of return became a huge campaign for Ghana that now put Ghana on a global destination as a safe place for a lot of diasporas, as a window to Africa, for a lot of diasporas looking to explore their ancestral lineage on the continent. And since that happened, what's happened is who have the economic power to invest on the continent begins to think outside the box, right? No one prays for Third World War to happen. No one prays for that. But with the geopolitical happenings across the world, it looks like most people of African descent across the world, they feel the fear. And you saw that in the last American election, where a lot of African American demographics that never voted, they all went to vote because they felt threatened that they might be killed if Trump wins the second election, without going too political. All this geopolitical happenings is making people to begin to think of what if this is now time to have something back home? What if there's a Third World War? What if I'm being kicked out in a place I've lived for 20, 30 years, which I call home? All these emotional drivers begins to make people think about having something on the continent. And to me, the data have shown this because African diasporas they've been there for 100 years, for more than 100 years. We've not seen investment activity on the continent from African diaspora. But since George Floyd, since Brexit happened, since Trump election happened, and we saw a lot of things that happened in the political scene in America, a lot of African America and a lot of African diasporas are beginning to think that they need to have something back home that they can fall back to.
Interesting point. So we are seeing a lot of people from the African diaspora who are using remittance as a tool for investment onto the continent, which, however you look at it, whatever the impetus or the catalyst, it's not a bad thing to see people investing on the continent from the diaspora instead of sending money back home for day-to-day subsistence, where we can create long-term economic value. So we are seeing a huge drive with regards to that, which is driving the increase of African mobile money. We're seeing a mobile revolution, more platforms offering these services. But would it be safe to say that this isn't happening across all 54 countries in Africa? It's probably happening more in some key markets.
It is safer to say that. You're touching on the point of financial inclusion.
Yes.
And when you look at what has happened, Africa has tried to leapfrog card scheme. If you have to break down how the payment ecosystem works, from card schemes to wallet, African is literally leapfrog and jump straight to mobile money. And for international listeners, mobile money simply means tokenizing your phone credit. It's still a form of stablecoin when you actually drill down into how it works. Tokenizing your mobile credit as a form of transferring funds and as an alternative to currency. But when you look at that, it started off in Kenya, right? We have to thank Kenya and M-Pesa for the mobile money revolution. But then all the telcos quickly realized that we actually can use telecommunication infrastructure for more than just telecommunication. We actually can use the infrastructure to make payment happen. So we begin to see a lot of telcos after M-Pesa, then you have MTN mobile money, then you have Safaricom, which is M-Pesa, then you have the Airtel as well. And how many other telcos begins to play in this space. And when you look on the continent today, Ghana, Nigeria, the mobile money is huge and big now. And we have to celebrate that as Africans. because that is an innovation that came out of Africa that truly solved the problem of financial exclusion. Because people living in those rural villages would, no matter how much you teach them how WhatsApp works or how Sendit.money wallet works, these people will take ages to change their behavior. But these individuals are used to cheap and paying phone, and they used to type in numbers. In terms of recharging their credit card, they used to type in *125#. So it was easy for them to bring them onto the mobile money platform. And we saw a lot of financially disconnected individuals being included in the financial space, thanks to mobile money. But then when you see how the progress of mobile money has worked, mobile money is now becoming the problem that it came to solve in the first place. And a good example is Ghana. There is a huge debate going on in Ghana right now about governments looking to tax citizens on mobile money transactions.
Yes.
Right? Because these people, when mobile money came, mobile money helped them to bypass exorbitant charges that bank would charge them. Banking in Africa in those days used to look like a privilege, right? I'm going to mention names of bank. Well, there's a particular South African bank that is in Ghana where in those days it's like a privilege for you to have a bank account.
True.
First Bank in Nigeria in those days, it's like you're privileged to have a bank account. But then when mobile money came, it doesn't become a privilege anymore. It becomes a means and necessity to make payment happen. And so there was a quick adoption, virality of that adoption. But now mobile money is now taking advantage of those people, rural people, who are living below the poverty line today and are doing a lot of microtransactions. And that's the reason you can see the people are now either putting their money back home in the situation of Ghana, or they're now looking for alternative means. And that's what's given birth to a lot of blockchain-based solutions on the continent as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Michael. So you discussed one of the key or historical points when it comes to mobile money in Africa, which is M-Pesa in Kenya. That more or less was the catalyst for this mobile revolution in Africa. Ghana and Nigeria also playing a big part with regards to the amount of users and the drive of mobile money. What have been some of the challenges for you operating in the space, more in the regards to, say, things such as shortage of forex, policy changes, devaluation of currency?
There is a huge challenge in the space, and we're probably going to hear a lot of startups and even scale-ups in this space will probably go into liquidation in the next few months. And the reason for that is not because they're not solving a huge problem. The reason for that is because there's lack of infrastructural solutions. And I'll clear that. 90% of every remittance company in the world today are still leveraging legacy systems.
Okay.
And 90% of them are still plugging into one person's API or another person's API. So the problem they're telling the world they're solving, they will not even be able to solve that problem operationally. Because for you to be able to reduce the cost and achieve speed, you must own the IP of your own infrastructure. If you're relying on a third-party infrastructure, there is no way that third party detects the unit of economics cost for you. So what we have, we quickly realize that a lot of fintechs in Nigeria, for example, if they're not piggybacking on Flutterwave, they're piggybacking on InterSwitch, they're piggybacking on Paystack. Same in Ghana, if they're not piggybacking PaySwitch. In Kenya, if they're not piggybacking on cellular. So we need more infrastructural players. And we need governments and private investors, because for you to be to play in the infrastructural space, you're not going to be raising $1 million as fintech. You want to be raising $30 million to even crack the surface, right?
Okay.
So it's a capital-intensive space to get into. But for Africa to truly achieve financial inclusion, there has to be more investment and more entrepreneurs tackling the financial infrastructure problem on the continent rather than building solutions on existing infrastructure problem.
That's very interesting. One thing I've observed looking from the outside is over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, we have seen a lot more companies or platforms that have popped up providing cross-border transactions, remittance services, and sometimes it's difficult to understand or differentiate what each company does or what value that they add. I mean, what I wanted to know is, in terms of what you do, what differentiates you from the other players in this space?
What differentiates us, that you can see us as a catalyst for a new form of future of payment on the continent. We're using a technology where everyone is still trying to figure out how technology works, including ourselves. So we're using the new technology. We're trying to change consumer behavior to use a new form of currency, which is digital US dollars. So the future is not there yet, but when you look at it, Nigeria's just launched the e-Naira. They've piloted that e-Naira with a lot of commercial banks. But what they don't realize is that if any commercial bank will make that work, that's going to kill their own market. And now they've kind of quickly changed their model and partnered with wallet providers by partnering with Flutterwave. So when you look at that, Nigeria's issued their own. I know an authority. Ghana is, I have a conversation with all its payment switch partners. Ghana is looking to issue e-cities. Most African countries will go down the road of creating their own national currency stablecoins. And when this time happens, how many banks in Africa today have the infrastructure to enable payment to happen on the blockchain? That's the question. So it still comes in for infrastructure problem. So it's easy for every central bank in Africa to jump the bandwagon of PR and say, I'm the first to do it. I'm forward thinking. But the people that will enable mass adoption to happen, which are the commercial banks, because no matter how big a fintech is, you never win the commercial bank game as far as Africa is concerned, right? These are the people that will still bring the mass adoption. These people today do not have the infrastructure. And if they do they have a roadmap in terms of how to actually make this infrastructure work? So it still comes out to the infrastructure problem. So you can see companies like Sendit.money and other fintech in that blockchain cross-border payment space as first movers, all right? A lot of them will fail, but from that failure, a lot of other coming after them will learn a huge lesson and realizing we need, because we've started a conversation now before people would not even think that, I can use my stablecoin as a means of cross-border payment, right? People are using those stable coins right now as a means of cross-border payment, and they're enjoying the ease that comes with it. And as that time goes on, people will realize that this is the only accessible means today. There's another industry in Africa that is opening up, which is a gig work. There's a software developers on the continent who doesn't want to travel off the continent, but working for a lot of international multinationals in the tech space. Most of these folks today, and you can do your research, they prefer to be paid in either USD or USDT, which is one of the currencies we have on our platform, rather than being paid in US dollars. And the reason for that is because if I send USDT or USDC to them, right now, as we're having a conversation, in less than 1 minute, they will get that in their wallet. And they can instantly sell that on a peer-to-peer market to get money straight into their bank account. So is that ease of doing cross-border payments without feeling being out of it? If I go to any bank in Africa today and I said I want to buy 10,000 US dollars, do you just understand the problem that yes. I'm going to go through? The paperwork, the land CFO.
Yes.
The user journey is so painful that you don't even want to think about it. So it's that new story, new conversation that we're bringing into this legacy system in terms of African doing payment with the rest of the world is not going to work. So we need to begin to build a new form of payment that will work on this technology. Crypto is a controversial story, but the blockchain technology, the technology that powers it, it's a real conversation that real companies, including the big investment banks in the world, JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, these are folks looking at this, EY, these are big multinationals looking in terms of how this technology can actually help in terms of solving a lot of humanity problem because of its power. So to me, I'm a big advocate in terms of utilizing that technology to build a new form of payment platform for the continent. And that's what we're trying to do at Sendit.money. It's hard, it's tough, but at least we're starting the conversation.
Awesome. So you've detailed there what differentiates you or Sendit.money is that you're using new technology built on your own infrastructure, which enables people to transact easily in US dollars. It makes it simple. And also the need for a new form of payment. So do you feel that there is still space in the market for new entrants?
Let's face it, payment is like buying food. If you can cook your food in a very tasty way, you have an amazing place people can share experience and have satisfaction having a good food, there will be a niche for you in that market. I think it's finding the niche that you can plug in. Remittance space will continue to grow. It's a place that the people in the UK alone accounted for, according to the National Statistics Department, there's 255,000 South Africans living in the UK. There's over 225,000 Nigerians living in the UK. Those are people in the formal economy, right? If you go to the informal economy in the UK, from these two countries, they probably triple that statistics that we have by the Department of National Statistics. So when you look at this, these people today, they do a lot of microtransactions because to us, we are family back in our home country. And culturally, we're kind people. The concept of looking after each other is ingrained in us. So people do transactions every day. The FX market will never die. It's a market that is hard to crack into, but there will always be a need for innovation. There will always be a need to disrupt that market. So it comes down to how can you quickly build a user-friendly interface, because that's going to be key. How can you make it simple for users to onboard and do transaction? And how can you build trust? So to me, it's a space that will continue to see innovation. A lot of investors that doesn't understand the space will say, the space is crowded. Then I say to them, but the food industry is crowded too.
Very true. But it keeps reinventing itself.
That's correct. So the payment space will continue to reinvent itself. You can see 10 years ago, the whole world were crazy about Visa, MasterCard and card scheme and how easy. And then we have contactless payment. And then COVID came and we actually appreciate the technology as a whole, right? And then from there, then we then go into having Apple Pay and Google Pay. The payment industry will continue to disrupt itself. There will be a lot of players that will try to solve that problem. Many of them will fail, but those that succeed will succeed big.
So I guess the key there is that, as you said, the payment markets will continue to innovate and disrupt itself, which is a very interesting concept. So as long as you find a niche, there will be a space for you. So innovation is key. So if we can home in on that, what are some of the ways that people are using, I guess, decentralized finance to reimagine financial services in Africa?
There is a lot. And if I'm allowed to, I'm going to touch on points. An amazing infrastructure company on the continent called Kotanipe. These folks are doing amazing building infrastructure to enable off-ramp and off-ramp, connecting the future and the past together in the present, enabling folks to send digital dollars and then they get that cash out in their Kenyan shillings and Ghanaian cedis. I strongly believe that in times of what's going to happen in this space, what we're going to see is innovation in terms of how people use that technology. How do we reach those people that have been left behind? Because when people talk about financial exclusion, you tend to have a lot of experts on financial exclusion nowadays that have never experienced what it means to be financially excluded.
Very true.
And those are the conversations you have, and I'm not being discriminatory here, but just to put it the way it is. You have a gentleman that was born in London, lived all his life in Southwest London, and privileged enough to go to Winchester College, and then probably have scholarship to go to Oxford University. And then the person is saying, oh, I'm an authority when it comes to financial exclusion. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I've got a worm growing in my tummy right now because you've got no clue what it means to be financially excluded, right? But when you talk about making payment, it's not just about having bank account. It's about creating a bridge, creating access to make sure that those people who are financially excluded today have an access and connection to the global financial economy. And that comes to having financial data for people to access credit. That comes to people being able to do trade out of Africa without paying huge fees for doing trade, for trying to earn a living. So to me, we've seen companies like Impact Markets, another great company working with Kotanipe, doing what we call universal basic income on the continent. Those are kind of use cases that many people are not talking about right now, but I see that blockchain as a technology will be used for what I call the future of human payment.
Yes.
And that's regenerative finance. It's a new space that is getting there as the world moves towards climate change, as we begin to see that as the world of work shifted and a lot of people will be laid off and there will be enough job to go to everyone, universal basic income will begin to be a conversation. And when those times happen, we want to be able to track, we want to be able to disburse in real time. And that's when people begin to appreciate that blockchain as a technology. So there's a whole use cases that can happen on that technology beyond payment, beyond remittance, in terms of actually creating access for over 1.1 billion people on the continent today that are financially excluded from global financial economy.
Awesome. So you've discussed how people are currently reimagining financial services in Africa, and in terms of how there is a need to reach those people that are genuinely financially excluded. You've been involved in the African financial services space or the financial services space for many years now. So during your time in this industry, how have things evolved?
I think to me, we've got to celebrate our achievements.
Yes.
And I say this to anyone in the world, and I want to be quoted on this. The robustness of the financial ecosystem that Nigerian banks have created and the central bank, I don't think any financial ecosystem in the world have created that. And I stand to be corrected. In Nigeria today, when I'm doing KYC, I can do KYC on a user by just having a BVN number.
Yes.
Because that BVN number is linked to their face recognition, to their biometric. Before the world started innovating on biometric payments, Nigeria is already in that forefront.
That's very true.
In terms of payment cashback, in terms of payment reversal, instantly, Nigeria has been doing this before the rest of the world has been doing this. So there's some great achievement that we've achieved on the continent, but I think we're very terrible in selling ourselves. And maybe due to old colonial affiliations. M-Pesa is another one on the continent. You know, M-Pesa as a mobile money. And remember back, so I wouldn't want to mention them. There's a particular big global bank in the UK here that launched a product saying NatWest and Barclays, and let me mention them, and saying, oh, you can send money to your friend just using their mobile phone. I'm thinking, no, that's M-Pesa. We've been using that in Kenya for the last 10 years. You thought that's an innovation, right? Because we only build products and stay in Africa. We don't export our innovations. And I think that's a conversation for the future. So to me, we need to celebrate our achievement. When it comes to making payments on the continent, we've built a robust engine and system. The problem is lack of interoperability. Those systems do not communicate with each other. They're fragmented system. So if you can have an engine that can connect all this system together, then Africa will have a seamless payment system that is power to power with the rest of the world. And just to point to that, I was part of a conversation years ago where I saw this vision and I tried to sell this vision to some smart people in one of the biggest institutions on the continent, Afrexim Bank. And today it gives me joy to know that Afrexim Bank has created that system, which is called the PAPS, Pan-African Payment System. And I'm closely monitoring how they were executing that. If they successfully executing that, that could be the beginning of a new economic liberation for Africa.
You've touched on some amazing points there in terms of the innovation that we saw many years ago out of Nigeria, things that we take for granted now, such as BVN number, payment cashback and reversal, also mobile money coming out of Kenya from M-Pesa, and we don't export and celebrate our achievements, which is something that is key in terms of how we position Africa for future prosperity and economic development, and just position ourselves as a continent that is important and significant when it comes to global trade, investment, business in general. So with that in mind, looking into the future, we are seeing some new and key policies and trade agreements and negotiations taking place in the forms of things such as AFTA, you've mentioned, also a Frexim Bank with the PAPS settlement system. And then also we always hear this ongoing discussion about, say, a single currency such as the ECO in Africa. Do you think we will ever get to a point where we see a single African currency?
Oh, yeah, that's a very tough question. And, you know, there is no way I'll do justice to answer that question without touching on a lot of emotional subject for Africans.
I understand.
Because to actually do justice to the question, we're going back to pre-colonial era. Because it's from that pre-colonial era we have our economic system in Africa as it is today. It is where how trade and commodity prices were fixed. It is those systems that still runs till this very day in terms of doing trades in Africa and commodity prices benchmark as well. But when you actually look into that, the moment Africa as a continent pegged its currency to US dollar was the day Africa actually gave away its economic prosperity mandate to the rest of the world and lost it. So entire global economy has been built on this perception. It's easy to have an after. After is great. I'm not anti-after, but when you actually drill down into the economic paper that set up after is literally European Union cohesion policy. So it is not customized for Africa as a continent. I'm talking as a Pan-African. So even after trade agreement that is set up, is it set up by Africans? Do we have committee of nations that actually sit down and high on how trade will work, how payment will work? So we're still creating pipelines. Pipelines will not take Africa to where it needs to be. It is a systems, technology, processes, frameworks that will take Africa to where Africa needs to be. It's not just about someone coming today and say, we're going to create an Africa single currency. Where are we going to peg that currency against?
True.
Where are we going to back that currency against? How are we going to make this a legal tender across African nation? How are we going to make this, what's going to be the central liquidity for trade to happen? There's a lot of conversations that needs to happen for that realization to happen. Having said that, for African to truly realize economic power, there has to be less dependency on US dollars. And the power that be in the world knows this. And believe you and I, they will do everything possible to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because the global war, when people talk about currency, people tend to now see currency as very linked to political and global geopolitical war. It is. Because when there is scarcity of US dollars in any economy that is reliant on US dollars, what happens? There's high inflation.
Yes.
And whether you want to call that, see that from an economic standpoint, a political standpoint, that to me is still political power. Because if I know that I can take my currency out of your ecosystem and your economy will crash in just 1 week, you have no choice but to listen and do what I ask you to say. Because if you don't, I know that I have a power that can crash the economy. And we've seen that in Nigeria right now, where Naira is literally a shit show. It is. So those are the kind of questions. Do we have leaders that have the balls? We don't need any Harvard professor or some super smart guy to solve African problem. African problem is easy to solve. It just takes willpower. So the conversation is not political. The conversation is currency. It still comes down to economic war. And the economic warfare is controlled by currency. So if Africa creates its own single currency today that every other African country trades against, then what that happens is you now have a truly independent Africa that is economically independent of any other part of the world. Having its own reserve, having its own liquidity, having its own African exchange, global exchange, where that single currency is actually traded and liquidated against every other 54 African currencies. Those are systems. I can buy US dollars today and I can trade that US dollars on any broker exchange anywhere in the world, right? I can't trade Naira or trade Kenyan shillings on a global exchange today. So for Africa to have its own currency that will be acceptable, there has to be a system that enables the trade and liquidity for settlement of trade to happen. So to me, that would be a bold step. And I pray that that happens in my lifetime, because that will be the day that Africa truly become an independent continent.
I think I need a moment just to digest all of that. You've painted an important reality in terms of where we are as a continent when it comes to our currency and the dynamics, whether that's some of the intra-African dynamics or dynamics that come from outside of Africa, in terms of what potentially needs to happen before Africa could even consider progressing the discussion about a single currency. So it's something definitely, as myself, as a Pan-Africanist, someone who believes Africa needs its own single independent currency. Hopefully it's something that we will see in our lifetime, or something that we will see taking shape within our lifetime, something for the future. So if we stick to the theme, future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time from what you do from like a cross-border payments perspective?
I'm very bullish about the continent. When people talk about Africa today, everyone talk about that sick child that needs medicine, that needs PT. That's the whole Africa. The new Africa is the youngest in the world. By 2050, according to United Nations, 1 in 4 people you see in the world are going to be of African descent. 70% of that entire population is between the age demographic of 16 to 25. If you go back to history and look at every new global power, let's take China as a good example. Africa is where China was 50 years ago. Let me tell you a lie. In terms of landmass, Africa is bigger than China, United States, and Europe combined in terms of landmass. Then imagine 5 years from now, what we're beginning to see on the continent, from innovation boom to fintechs, that is just the beginning to tell the world Africa is rising. Our leaders might not get it right. Our leaders might not do the right thing. They might be corrupt. They might think selfishly about themselves. But there is a young Africa coming that is aware, that is agile, is resilient. And I'm one of those Africans. You're one of those Africans.
Yes.
And we are the hope of that continent. Africa now invests in each other. Before, when a company exits its company in Africa, what do? They go and buy properties and buy Lamborghinis. When you see what's happening in the tech space in Africa, most companies that had the privilege of exiting their companies, they're investing in other startups.
Yes.
That is the new Africa. That Africa brings hope and joy to my face when I remember that. Our perception about ourselves is changing. Our hope about ourselves is changing. We're beginning to see the value in ourselves. And as we're beginning to see more African telling and taking charge of telling our stories, like this podcast.
Awesome.
So 5 years from now, I see a glorious future that has begun now, but will continue to grow. And 10 years from now, we'll see a boom of acceleration in terms of human capital and in terms of economic prosperity on that continent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. You've given us a very passionate and also very pragmatic view in terms of where you see Africa in 5 years' time. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself, Sendit.money, in 5 years' time?
Well, in time for 5 years' time, where do I see myself? I'll continue to support and build ecosystems and have conversations and tell the stories about Africa, about its people, about Black people, and the goodness we bring to the table. I'll continue to mentor young aspiring entrepreneurs to follow suit, because for us to change our stories and our destiny, we need more people who wants to create companies, because that's how we can have the power to have conversation on a global table. In terms of Sendit.money, we're hanging out. The market is tough right now. We're doing everything possible to raise the necessary funds we need. And I'm still very hopeful that we'll still be here in 5 years' time. And in the likelihood of event of not being here in 5 years' time, we'll definitely be doing something else to continue the story of innovation and entrepreneurship of an African founder.
Thank you for that. I know the times are tough, but I know you guys are doing some amazing work. So I'm hopeful that you'll still be here in 5 years' time, growing, innovating, and shaping the future of mobile money, remittance, cross-border payments in Africa. So yes, looking forward to watching how things develop. But yes, keep up the great work.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or even affirmations that keep us going when times are good or when times are challenging. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Absolutely, I do. I think to me, one mantra that I always tell people is don't let the war take away your smile. No matter what happens, no matter how tough it gets going, find a reason to smile. Don't let the war take away your smile.
Thank you for sharing that with us today, Michael. It's been an awesome conversation. As we're coming to the close of our conversation, I was hoping you could give us some closing remarks, final calls to action for anyone who's interested in what you do or just interested in general in terms of mobile money, remittance, cross-border payments in Africa.
Absolutely. If you're an investor listening to this and you're looking to work with crazy entrepreneurs who've been there, who've done that, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's connect. Let's have conversation. If you're also a founder, a first-time founder, or you're still thinking, taking the route of entrepreneurship innovation as an African, reach out to me. I love mentoring people like you because the future of our continent, I strongly believe, will be driven by entrepreneurs and through their innovations they're going to bring to reality. And also, if you're a policymaker, politicians listening to this, you can build a great Africa that works for all of us. And you can make more money and still do good for your people. I would love to have a conversation with you and just grab a tea and let's see if my conversation with you can change your perception about leadership.
Awesome. What a way to end today's conversation. That has been an amazing conversation. It's great to get your perspective on some important issues all the way from remittance to politics to currency to culture. I think we've covered quite a lot today, and I'm confident that your story, the message, the knowledge that you've shared today will definitely inspire other people to jump in there, whether they've been sitting on the fence and haven't been sure whether or not to kind of get involved or get going with that startup or that idea, I'm sure that your message today would have spurred some people on to take that step.
Thank you, Tessa, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the podcast today, and thank you for taking the time out to have a very open and honest conversation with us today. So it's been a pleasure. Once again, Michael Lawal, thank you for your time, and I hope we stay in contact and speak soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me today, and I hope you have enjoyed the rest of your day.
You too. Speak soon. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.